Thank you very much for having us and for organizing also the event. If you don't mind, I will share my screen because we cannot live without PowerPoints, right? Nowadays. So I created one, very short one though. This is just an overview of the book. I don't want to go into the details of each chapters. Maybe outline a little bit the different parts of the book that are also in the title itself. So a first part of the book is dedicated to inequalities, but certainly inequalities are also common base in other chapters that are in other parts of the book. Talking about youth, of course, also we should conjugate it with different forms of inequalities that we see on a local scale. And also talking about democracy and social movements, we should consider, how the pandemic has increased and exacerbated pre-existing inequalities. What I would like to do is to present the book in a more general way and give you an overview also of the challenges. And I'm not saying that the book is only comprehensive of what the pandemic was. That wasn't really our main goal. Our goal was to collect different sociologies and different geographies in order to talk about what is at stake, and what is at stake is global. Now, talking about the pandemic and the effect, I would say the global effect of the pandemic, someone would say that there was a sort of limitation of the terms of globalization, and someone would also argue that globalization was ending because of the pandemic. Of course, we remember well that among the policies, the strictest policies that we had during the 2 years of the pandemic, there was a movement restriction, not just from one town, one city to another, but of course also between countries. We remember that this limitation created a sort of I will say a rediscovery of the importance of the national in a sense. However, what is at stake is still global, and the problematic it's still global. So we, of course, engage with the question of pandemic, first of all, from an individual perspective, also as sociologists. But the point is that everybody has something to say about the pandemic. We really think that that was something individualized and a collective experience at the same time. Everybody can say what happened that moment, that period in their life. So for this reason also, I would say the posture also of each sociologist, each authors that are part of this volume is important. What they experience also and their perspective on the pandemic, and I think it's not an easy choice that you make when you select a topic connected to the pandemic. It's always related to what you experienced at the time. And I think this is pretty much clear also in each contributions in the book. So as I said, the main point of, even thinking and positing the possibility of sociology of the pandemic is related to the necessity to connect sociologies. As you know, connecting sociologies, connecting history is a leitmotif today in a global sociological approach that is trying also to avoid the Eurocentric perspective on what is happening. And we really wanted to keep this fundamental posture and continuing thinking globally, but at the same time giving a lot of credit and importance to the local aspects and the national context. So we think that the idea of global stratification when it comes to inequalities was the perfect continent for this kind of approach. And we also notice, as Benilo da Silva said, that there are maybe different forms of resilience, different forms of different ways to cope with the pandemic, depending on different local context, national context, and so on. So, of course, we are keeping globally, the perspective, it's still global in terms of global stratification, but you have to consider also that the reactions and the perceptions, the imaginaries that are created by the pandemic are very much different depending on, well, how you also contextualize, how you process crisis. And of course, in Western countries, we can process crisis in a way, but in the global South, maybe there is a different approach that is more able to cope with a situation of uncertainty and a situation of precarity. So, as I said, the global does not disappear, although there are some features of globalization that are put on hold and suspended, and that's true also for several states of exceptions that took place during the pandemic, but then, well, disappeared. So I'm not saying that we are back to the normal and normalized world, but certainly we cannot say that the pandemic reduced the meaning, the sense itself of globalization when it comes to, well, a global kind of crisis, as well as the climate crisis. It's interesting to note that Bruno Latour, writing his, I think it was his last book actually, called Lockdown, Metamorphosis, is talking about a sort of a chance that we had during long lockdowns to reassert, in a sense, or humanity, but humanity in terms of species. So what we are in terms of what we do in this earth. Really, his word are trying to connect the natural element of humans and their materiality, the fact that they are living in a space that is limited, and the fact that we also have finite dimension. So that was very important, because in a sense, it's saying that we take more care of ourselves and we reconsider also our role and our imaginary that is not infinite, that is not going, universally, but it is reduced to our sphere, to a sphere of experience. I think this is very, very important. But at the same time, we know that even during the period of lockdowns, during the pandemic, we still had an imaginary that was global. And this imaginary was global for several reasons, because you cannot process the pandemic without thinking globally, because we knew, everybody knew, not just in the academic sphere, of course, that without comparison, without comparing situations, and also recognizing, acknowledging the global extent of the crisis, we couldn't imagine the pandemic itself. There is no local or national unique dimension of the pandemic. The pandemic must be on a scale that is global. So yes, there is this individualized part that is reduced to the territoriality where we are, limited spaces in our room, in our apartment, etc. But at the same time, the imaginaries are always global. And talking about the imaginaries, I think this is really the most important part of the book in terms of original contributions. I'm saying that because several works have been published, of course, about the pandemic, but very few talking specifically about youth. So of course we are talking about inequalities, different forms of inequalities: gender, immigration status, disabilities, social classes, of course, but rarely we consider the pandemic in terms of intergenerational strain that was created due to the fact that, well, there is a lack of socialization during the most important period of uh, adolescent, the most important period of their life for teens, and their capacity also to imagine society. So that was pretty much important, I think, and all contributions shed a light in different ways with different perspectives, also sociologically. Emanuele could talk about that, about how the young generation was affected by the pandemic in a way that is more related to the possibility to imagine the future. And that, I think, was pretty much important. Pretty much important because without a normalized interaction at school or after school with their peers, uh, the youth was unable to, well, to imagine a different way to be, to imagine also, and to, I would say, reflect on their condition as, you know, as an individual and as a collective. So I think that the works from by Paola Rebugini, for example, and Colombo really point out this aspect very well: the impossibility to imagine the future due to the fact that you do not know, in the moment you are supposed to interiorize society, you do not know what is going to be your future. You do not know society yet. And that's the first, the last, sorry, slide, and also the last part of the book. It's not less important, of course, but we know that populism is a very common subject, and you know, crossing disciplines, of course, and pretty much also mainstream, but it's necessary. It's necessary to talk about that, because in the moment where we most needed institutions such as public health, medicine, science, and education, when we most needed them, and they were also at the core also of the fight against the pandemic, they were also the most criticized, challenged, and distrusted. So this is a very important point, because of course also the title of the last part is referring to democracy, and there was a debate about that. Should we use the word democracy? Well, I think it's still important, because the pandemic didn't change authoritarian countries. Not much. I mean, someone would say that they coped well with the pandemic because they just operated in an authoritarian way, so that there was nothing to be afraid of. It is true, though, that democracy seems to look weak, and to fail in communicating also the importance of being transparent, and the importance itself of the same institutions that are claimed to be at the core of the democratic institutions. Again, public health, and a rational process, public debates, public sphere, and so on. So definitely we see that in connection to populism, in connection with the well, I would say the main challenges that are brought by the climate change, but also wars, and in general also, I would say, institutions in democracy. So I will stop here, just going back quickly and saying that the last part of the book actually has been very important, because it really underscores different forms of populism that are reappearing and getting stronger during the pandemic.